Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's taster session for Dr. Darren Elliot-Smith's video essay making short course, which will run from January 2026 to March 2026. My name is Justin Hunt, and I'm the Curator for Queer Extension and the Interim Deputy Director at the Live Art Development Agency. I'm delighted to be producing this event in collaboration with Darren, which will offer new ways for artists and researchers to expand their skill sets and explore new modes of creative output. Just some quick housekeeping as we're on a Zoom. First, this event will be recorded, so please be mindful of that and have your cameras off if you wish. And we will make this recording available via the websites as we just discussed, so you'll have access to that. We are in a Zoom meeting style session, so please make sure your mics are on mute when not engaging in any discussion or asking a question. We'll help you do that if necessary. Feel free to use the chat to ask any questions or get support from me. I will respond as fast as possible. And of course, please be respectful within the Zoom itself and the Zoom chat. Should you wish to purchase a ticket for the course, if you haven't already done so, you can do so via the link that I'm putting into the chat now. And of course, this taster is helping you decide on that, and we hope you will. The course will run for 4 weeks online and end with a research and presentation day at the Live Art Development Agency Reading Room in London. That final day, of course, if some people can't make it, it's totally fine, but it is an option, and we hope you can. I'm delighted to welcome Darren and to hear from him tonight, showing off what he will do in the Thinking Images videographic essay course. Darren, over to you.
Thank you very much, Justin. Yeah, like we've just kind of talked about, I suppose, this particular session is to just give you a bit of a taster in terms of how I normally deliver sessions on videographic essay making. And also to kind of give you a bit of an angle from my own perspective as someone who has worked within the field for quite a while and is still developing ideas and delivery of content in that particular area. So it's not going to involve anything kind of too interactive tonight. It's just basically giving you some examples. I'm going to give you some illustrated examples as well, and a little bit of theory, hopefully nothing too heavy. I've had a heavy day of teaching undergraduates here, so I'm kind of like using this as a chance to kind of remember why I love the subject as well. So please, if you have any questions or have any contributions to make, obviously, I don't want to make this too one-sided as well. If you have any comments that you'd like to make about some of the essays, the video essays that I might show you as examples of different styles and approaches, then please feel free to do that in the chat as well. It'd be really good to just get your feedback as well on what you think. So bear with me 1 second, just going to get to the next slide. So what I'm hoping to do really today is to kind of give you, as Justin has done, a little bit of an overview of the short course to begin with, very briefly. A short outline of what videographic criticism really is and where it comes from. And I'll try and kind of manage time and obviously compress where I think is necessary, because there's some elements of that particular history and particular kind of approaches to the practical methods of producing videographic work that will actually be developed in the course itself. But obviously we'll at this point just touch on some of those theories and give you some examples of how they are put into practice. My particular angle is going to take my own perspective on things. I've used this outline in the past as research day kind of exercises, where I've explained my method and my kind of practice to other academics and other artists as well, who might be interested in this as a queer feminist practice as well. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview of that too. We'll be looking at the idea of what video essay work does as a deconstructive practice to analyze the structures of a particular piece of work or pieces of work that might actually set us on place as subjects and speak to us in an ideological way, and how actually queer feminist practices often kind of explode those things, break them apart and try and reconstruct some things that may well have once been oppressive and then turn them around, transform them into something that is actually more celebratory. So there is also, I'm going to end, if I have time, with a little bit of a kind of case study overview of what happens when actually there is a kind of clear explosion of interest in video essay making, particularly on YouTube and Vimeo and various other kind of platforms that share other people's personal perspectives on film and artwork, visual artwork as well. And what happens as a result of that idea of queer use as well. So I'm going to draw upon a few theorists, in particular Sarah Ahmed, for that as well. And please, if you have any kind of questions, or if there are any terms you think might need a little bit more of definition, then please, I can't see the chat, but pop them down in the chat. And then when we get time at the end, I'll try and go over those particular things as well. So a little bit of an introduction to me. I'm a senior lecturer here at the University of Stirling. So I'm up in rainy Stirling at the moment, happily away from the rain and kind of wind. But I've taught for the last 6 years in gender studies here, gender and sexuality studies in particular. But my core interest is in filmmaking and also in film cultural studies. I've taught for many a year on lots of different courses, but have often over the last kind of 10 to 12 years utilized video essay making as part of my pedagogy, my teaching practice. And that's kind of extended sometimes outside of the world of academia to film festivals, and also kind of publications from academic journals and also media-based journals as well. So there is a sense that when you produce video essay work or videographic work, there is a wide audience for this, both in terms of the mainstream online. There's plenty of people producing video essays and monetizing those video essays online in order to kind of feel like they have a voice, but also to actually kind of gain a semblance of a fan base, and also to kind of feel like they are kind of analytically minded, but also from an academic fan or an ACA fan perspective, there are people who actually kind of give themselves over to this idea of a very hardcore appreciation of a particular style or a particular director or a particular franchise of film or video work. So I've been producing them for quite a while. My main interests are obviously in gender and sexuality in my publications, both written and video work as well, but mainly within genre work. And I'm known kind of online as a queer horror doctor. So I tend to kind of focus more on horror film, on Gothic adaptations from literature and TV and film as well. But I do extend some of my interests and work to other genres as well, in particular melodrama and high camp melodrama too. So I will be going through some of my examples, and some things that I might find interesting may often kind of verge into the world of horror. And I apologize if you're not a horror fan, although maybe I shouldn't be apologizing if you're not a horror fan. But don't worry, tonight is not going to include anything too drastic or shocking or gory or anything. It's really just a kind of surface take on some of those kind of ideas that I find interesting. So, as Justin said, the course itself is going to be very short lecture-based workshops to begin with. We'll be running them as a slightly kind of similar way to the way we're running tonight, but obviously what I tend to do is teach in maybe 10 to 15-minute kind of short bursts of information that I may deliver on a lecture-based style, and I may use illustrative kind of videos to be able to kind of demonstrate sometimes quite abstract terminology. And then we might actually work out how to understand them by using videos to do that. So they will also be kind of mini tasks that you will be asked to do each week, either watch a video essay or watch a take on a particular theme or theory, and then try and deconstruct what practices are being used in that particular video essay as well. There'll be short practical digital tasks as well, where I may ask you to do something like compress a film. So I will have a number of different digitized versions of particular films that I'll give you access to. And what often is the best first way of approaching video essay work is to take something like a 90-minute film, watch it in its entirety, and then try and compress it down to about 2 or 3 minutes based on a particular theme. So that might be a color, that might be a particular character, that might be a particular approach or a particular theme that you find interesting. And every single person has a very different take on their kind of compressed film. And it's one really easy way to kind of work out the basics of editing before we start to move into something a little bit more complex. But at the end of that course, all the way through, we'll obviously be thinking about those mini digital tasks that we'll be given, as well as some theoretical stuff. But the production of your own 5-minute video essay will be the kind of culmination, the end product that you'll be able to kind of produce, both from the online version of that course, so when we're running it over those 4 weeks, and also when you get to actually be in person at the on site at LADA itself, when you're producing some of the work that will be made accessible to you in the digital archive there as well. So I'm going to give you an example, first of all, of one of my ex-students. So not the students here at the university. I've run this course before at different kind of creative hubs, in particular in Creative Stirling, which is a creative hub in Stirling itself. And this is an example of transformative work. So this particular, I'm not going to play it all, I'll just play a little bit of it. It's an example of a take on historical director James Whale. You may know some James Whale films, in particular the original Frankenstein, the Universal film from 1931, which often is kind of seen as the definitive Universal horror. But James Whale's work, as you watch it and how it progresses, is often kind of very camp. James Whale himself was a queer director and often imbued very subtextually queer and kind of comedic elements in his films that are often kind of wrongly seen just as a pure gothic and a pure horror. So this particular student decided to kind of edit together all of the camp and comedic versions or comedic elements of their film to kind of turn the genre from one thing into another. I'm just going to play a little bit of this.
How do you do? Mr. Carl Limley feels it would be a little unkind to present this picture without just a word of friendly warning. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Able to hear that, Darren. Can you hear it? Now it's back.
My experiments did not turn out quite like yours. My first experiment, so lovely, we made her a queen. Sharp, don't you think? Oh, there's the king out again. Even Roy sometimes.
Okay. So you get the example there. This is just a pure compilation. Some would argue it's kind of a supercut, I suppose, but it's a very basic way of kind of compressing films all together, picking certain moments of them, and then when they're juxtaposed together with most of that kind of typical traditional Gothic horror removed out of it, what we get instead is kind of a comedic version of that film.
I paused you for a second. There was a question in the chat about that actually. Squid asked, the exercise you mentioned condensing the film, would the result be a written treatment or a video? I'm assuming it's video.
Yeah, completely a video. By condensing the film, what you would normally use is you say, we've often done it with films like Suspiria, even Bride of Frankenstein, things like that. I will be making other films available other than horror, but there will be a good proportion of them that will be either queer or horror as well. What you would do is basically decide on a particular theme or motif, and then you would basically get moments that you think are interesting or demonstrate that particular theme, and you would edit or find chunks of that film, compress it down so that it moves, say, from about 100 so minutes to about 3 minutes. It's quite a difficult exercise, but it's actually quite a kind of good one when you realize actually you don't need the majority of the film if you really want to only condense the film along the lines of a particular motif. Then you can do that quite simply by rejecting the rest of the film in favor of other things.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and it's a really easy way to get to know how to just do basic edits as well. So we'll be teaching you how to kind of do that, I suppose, as we move through the module. So videographic work, I often think, is quite postmodern and therefore deconstructive. It aligns completely with my understanding of feminist work and also the queer work that I do, that often kind of lingers on media and other texts, largely in moving images and visual art, that often kind of offer a counter reading or a personal take on things. They may often give you a chance to subvert some of those dominant kind of critical values that exist in films and TVs that may be patriarchal or heteronormative, may have an imperialist or colonial narrative. And you can then turn around this particular text in order to kind of create a new one. And often within video essay work, because what we're doing is kind of unoriginal work. So you're taking somebody else's work that already exists and then turning it into something that has a transformative potential, something that is changed in some way. And when video essays go out into the world and obviously get released in Vimeo, on YouTube and various other streaming platforms, sometimes there are issues around copyright, and we'll talk about copyright in a little bit if you are worried about that. But obviously, from an academic and artistic point of view, what prevents against any kind of comeback around copyright claims is that you are doing transformative work, that you are changing the work from one thing into another. And most of the time, when you're an academic, you're changing it from something that is educational and turning it into something that is more entertaining, or changing something the other way around, entertaining into something educational. So the work we do, particularly within the people that I follow as other video essayists, is countercultural, feminist, queer work. It does creative work, and it's also deconstructive too. So the video essay itself arguably comes from a longer history of what's known as essay filmmaking. But there was a particular conference that started off this kind of, I suppose, explosion of video essays, particularly in academia. And it was a conference in Zurich around about 2002 called Stuff It. And it basically exposed lots of different academics and video artists' work that were kind of utilizing experimental and documentary style approaches towards how they treated video art. So Ursula Biermann collected all of those kind of papers and responses to this particular approach in her collection here, Stuff It, the Video Essay in the Digital Age. And she gives a good definition of this, what a video essay actually is. It situates itself, she says, somewhere between documentary video and video art. And she says actually part of its power is that it has to be an in-between genre, and that because of this, videos often fall through given categories at certain art events, film festivals, and activist conferences, because no one quite knows where to place them. So for documentary, sometimes they're often seen as too experimental, self-reflective, very subjective. Or for art video, if we call them art videos, they often stand out because they are clearly kind of doing more work than cultural work, and they're clearly socially involved, or sometimes they're explicitly political. So they've often kind of had this troublesome beginning where actually no one quite knows where to place things. Another person who contributed to that conference was an academic called Nora Alter, who talked about the idea of the difference between the literary essay, when we create an essay, we write them down, and what a visual essay does. She says that when we lift the literary essay off the page and render it in a media arts frame with sound and image, we attempt the video essay. And she says it's a postmodern project that confounds the boundaries of literature and time-based art. So when we're thinking about the video essay, Abigail Breslin basically talks about this as being no different from its print counterpart, that sometimes when we write an essay, we push towards some insight or some truth, and the essay tends to ask more questions than it answers. And that kind of asking is quite central to the video essay. Often we find video essays are kind of about this kind of discovery of something that is becoming, rather than something that offers a finite conclusion. So often it's about the investigation itself around unraveling things and allowing the potential of something to be changed from its original form, rather than having something that feels more like an academic video, academic essay that has a finite conclusion to it. Sometimes my students kind of get confused about that, and they kind of go, but you want to know exactly what I think? And I'm like, no, you don't have to conclude it completely in the way that you would a written essay. A video essay is more about the idea of, you know, the journey, I suppose, in a cliched way, of going through those questions and changing things. So I'm going to show you an example of a video essay now. There's going to be a running theme here. Wonder Woman is going to feature a fair amount, and also Marilyn Monroe might feature a little bit as well. So you see, I'm not completely mired in the world of horror. This is a video essay that was done by a friend of mine, Catherine Grant, who is quite well known in the industry of academic and video essay making. And she runs courses very similar to this one, where she kind of teaches both people who are within video art world and also academic world to make video essays. This is a kind of response, a very kind of poetic video essay that uses the newer version of the Wonder Woman kind of a DC world narrative. And it uses Judith Butler's concept of becoming, and also Simone de Beauvoir's concept of becoming, in order to talk about gender and womanhood in relation to the images we see in Wonder Woman. The sound isn't necessarily so important here. So if you don't hear any sound, don't worry. It's just really about what we see on screen.
You're strong and you believe. You have greater powers than you. Strong and believe. Strong and you believe. Greater powers than you. Never let your guard down. You expect that that will be better. That will never be better. You keep doubting yourself. No, I don't. Yes. No, I don't.
So you can see there that those of you who may well have read any Judith Butler will recognize that as one of her key quotes around the idea of what gender is, that actually it's about the repeated stylized delivery of a particular set of tropes and structures that we associate with gender, that when they're repeated over and over again, give us this idea of what gender is, and they sometimes fix into place and give this idea of a natural sort of way of being. So Judith Butler's work is about kind of deconstructing that kind of supposed naturalness of gender. And what I suppose that particular video essay is trying to do is show us the repeated kind of forms of types of gender that that particular Patty Jenkins version of Wonder Woman is giving, and asking us to kind of understand the kinds of images that we see films kind of reproduce over and over again. So it's a very quick, experimental, poetic kind of take on something. And some video essays are kind of very short in their responses to things and are quite, I suppose, withdrawn in terms of how much detail they have in terms of their employment of theory, and others are a lot more involved and a lot longer as well. So just to pull it back to a little bit more theory, and I apologize for there being more theory, but this theory I find particularly interesting, and it extends on from some things around the usefulness of understanding what films do, particularly from people like Jean-Luc Godard, who is a kind of a French New Wave director, auteur, and also film critic. And he recognized the importance of this idea of using film in order to analyze film, rather than writing down stuff into an essay. Sometimes that involves a different semiotic system, a different style of expressing ourselves. And that actually people like Edward Small and Jean-Luc Godard have talked about any theory of film really should be in a version of another film. An investigation into the moving image form should be also in the moving image form. And this is what's known as direct theory. So Jean-Luc Godard talks about this when he looks at some essay films that actually said that film scholars now answer images not only with words, but also with other images as well. So it's about the importance of understanding kind of media language in order to then produce something that has a meaning in itself. So Ursula Beeman talks about this as well. Written film theory, while developed, is, she says, fundamentally flawed, as words and written forms are sometimes inadequate to theorize those constituents of a medium that is audiovisual by its very nature. So sometimes some of my students actually find, when they're given an option either to write something about a film or to make a film about the film using the film itself, they find some of them that struggle with the use of language to express themselves in a written form, find it actually quite, eye-opening, that they can suddenly find this new form of expressing themselves to be actually more at the core of who they are as individuals as well. So I'm going to skip over some of these slides, so forgive me for doing that, but obviously just to give a sense of where these video essays come from. They often are born in the idea of the film essay. So film essays come out of European cinema, and they often are documentary in their form to begin with. Hans Richter, who is a documentary filmmaker and academic, was talking about the kind of birth of the film essay in the 1930s and 40s that were very poetic video essays or very poetic style documentaries. They tended to be what he called city symphonies. So they often focused on parts of different cities in Europe and also in the States as well. And there were kind of like actuality documentaries where they'd capture everyday life in the city, and they'd be representative in an emotional and an intellectual way. So they would be very kind of evocative in terms of the images that they would use, but they wouldn't really tell a narrative in any way. So film essays or essay films are clearly where one part of the video essay kind of starts to develop itself. And I've given you some other examples there of other directors and key names that actually developed this idea of a film essay or an essay film. So people like Chris Marker and also Laura Mulvey as well, who some of you may know because of her work on the male gaze theory, and as a feminist film critic, she's quite well known. She tended to make films that would actually be poetic, but also documentary in form as well. So films like Riddles of the Sphinx from Laura Mulvey is quite an important one to remember as well. So her work, and I'm going to skip over Laura Mulvey. I used to be taught by Laura Mulvey at the University of Birkbeck when I did my master's. So she, brings back some good, some bad memories for me. So forgive me if I skip over Laura Mulvey's Riddles of the Sphinx, but just to tell you that actually, if you are interested, there's a link there in the slides that I'm going to make available to people who want them, just so that you can have a look at how she approaches experimental filmmaking. There are other directors and filmmakers that we might want to go to, in particular from the world of video art. People like Dara Birnbaum in the kind of development of the work around VHS and re-editing VHS is also someone we might turn to see these kind of poetic elements that have come as part of video essay work. So in particular, this film, which I saw a few years back now, while I was in Madrid, it was kind of playing as a special kind of throwback of Dara Birnbaum's work. This is kind of a collection of different TV kind of moments of transformation that Linda Carter's Wonder Woman does in order to kind of show us this idea of gender in transformation as well. So this is fairly experimental. She keeps going for quite a so I'm just gonna, I mean, that goes on for quite a while as well, and it's about the immersion in these moments of transformation. So I'm just going to pick out Laura Mulvey for a moment and just kind of raise her up a little bit as one of the people that is perhaps at the center of this kind of reinvention of academia in particular, and how actually this love of textual analysis and cinephilia is at the heart of video essay making. We wouldn't care for the things we make video essays of unless we love them a little bit too much. And Laura Mulvey kind of talks about this idea of this return to textual analysis in her work, Death 24 Times a Second, where she says actually this change in the way that we watch films and that we collect and absorb them into our very culture and to our very being is about the way in which we kind of can get closer and rewatch over and over again the things that we think define us. So she says actually the video essay is part of this reinvention of the love of cinema in an era of stillness and the moving image as well. And one of her first works actually was on something that she loved quite a lot. And this is the first Marilyn Monroe kind of clip I'm going to show you. And it's from Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And she took a little bit of inspiration also from other academics and philosophers, people like Roland Barthes, who talks about the idea of these two concepts in camera lucida in relation to photography, in relation to stills photography. And for Laura Mulvey, she basically said that part of the pleasure of working with video essays is about this idea of the punctum. And she says, actually, we feel something more for certain images and certain films and certain icons of cinema or television that actually suddenly have a personal wounding impact upon us. We feel them almost reaching through the images and they touch us more than others. And therefore we have a direct relationship with them. So the punctum that Roland Barthes talks about is that which pierces the viewer, that which comes through the screen almost, reaches out to us and kind of grabs us in a way. And that's what a lot of video essayists tend to kind of work with. It's things that really resound with us and make us feel something. So this is an example of one of her first video essays. It's very short and very basic, but it actually does quite a lot of interesting work in terms of the very basic editing that she does here. All she does is take a moment from the opening number of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and repeats a moment in this film that she finds interesting. And she does precisely because she finds Marilyn Monroe interesting. She finds her interesting as a product of Hollywood that was consumed and exploited, but also as someone who is quite a subversive character within that same system, that she's actually performing a version of herself that is separate from the real Monroe. And she draws attention to this artificiality of what we see. I'm just going to play a little bit of that.
Learned an awful lot in Little Rock. And here's some advice I'd like to share. Learned an awful lot in Little Rock. And here's some advice I'd like to share. Learned an awful lot in Little Rock.
So I'm just going to talk over the top of this because this is how I saw also Mulvey talk about this when I was a student. So she's interested in the robotic nature that Monroe performs this particular act. And slowing down and repeating, she says, is key and is at the heart of deconstruction. And that's what we kind of do when we're doing video essay work. We'll often kind of load the entire film or sequence into the video essay kind of timeline, and then we'll scan back and forwards, rewatch things over and over again in order to find things that we think are interesting. And sometimes slowing things down is one way of doing that, and freeze framing things. So you see this kind of gesture she makes here to Jane Russell, and then hitching up this kind of imaginary bra strap is this idea of kind of remembering the sexual potency of Monroe, but also recognizing this as a kind of robotic act, she says. These gestures that she makes are also about sisterhood. And those of you who've done any watching of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes will know on the surface we can understand it as a very heteronormative film. It's about women who are good, supposed gold diggers, trying to find a millionaire, trying to kind of, you know, marry them for the betterment of their lives. But actually what is revealed is this kind of queer undercurrent as well that develops from the sisterhood between these two women. And also she freezes this frame as well here. This is a kind of pose that Monroe is quite well known for. And there are lots of images of that particular shot and also other shots of her doing this kind of, you know, framing her face with the two hands. And she thinks that this particular moment is completely evocative of what Monroe is all about. So this moment for her was kind of something that pierced her in some way and caused her to do deeper analysis of that particular film and of Monroe's work as well. So that was probably an example of a very early piece of work that someone who is quite high up in film studies and also in gender studies and cultural studies, moving towards video essays as a way to kind of think more deeply about film and get closer to film in ways that actually writing about film had not really allowed her to do before. I've got a couple of quotes there on screen just about the idea of using moving images in order to kind of critique themselves as well. And sometimes what moving images in video essays do is to reveal sometimes the labor of their construction, the way in which meaning has been put together as well. And also a way that Marilyn Freeman talks about video essays in a way that actually make us reinterpret our engagement with film as well. She says that when we collaged sound and images in startling ways in the video essay work we do, it requires the audience to play a part in that construction of the meaning that we create. She says, far from being a media opiate, she says, making us kind of just accept and watch in a passive way the things that we receive on screen. The video essay instead requires us to wake up and to stay awake and almost to rush to the screen in order to try and find meaning in it themselves as well. So I'm going to move through things a little bit quickly here, just because I want to show you a couple of different ways of looking at video essays. I suppose, remember, I was talking about that idea of a dual development of where video essays come from. On the one hand, they come from a documentary past. And the other hand, they come from a poetic, experimental kind of video art history. And to be honest, that's kind of how they still exist to a certain extent within the world of people who analyze video essays. So people like Christian Keithley here, I've tried to kind of evoke what he says about video essays belonging to two different kind of pathways. The first is what he calls the explanatory mode, where he says, when we look at video essays in this mode, there are short critical essays on a given film or filmmaker, and they typically read out in voiceover by the author and supplemented with carefully chosen and organized film clips. So in essence, they're kind of like an illustrated lecture that's recorded. Now, I don't mean, some of my students tend to kind of go away and just record a PowerPoint with clips in it, and that's not the same thing as what a video essay does. So a video essay will borrow from that a little bit, but it will involve some clear, intricate editing to be able to demonstrate the things that are being spoken about in the script on screen by showing those things at the same time. So I'll give you a quick example from one of my pieces of work here. This is something I did as a keynote a video essay for a conference a couple of years back, based on a paper that I then turned into a chapter for someone else's book. But it helped me do a lot of the thinking work first by producing this video essay. So this is on werewolves, as you can see, or queer wolves, as I call them, wolf girls and werebears as well. So I'm just going to let this play for a little while, and I may well skip through some of the bits as well.
How do you do? Non-normative sexuality is often chief among these concerns, alongside the threat that queer, gay, and lesbian sexualities pose to an assumed cisgender and heterosexual spectator.
You stay. We belong dead.
In my previous research, I've argued that the study of monstrous homosexuality and queerness in the horror film has also revealed the celebratory pleasures offered to LGBTQ+ individuals via oppositional identification with the very same monsters that threaten the norm, albeit problematically. In departing from the analysis of the out queer monster as a symbol of heterosexual fear and anxiety, my study moves the discussion forward to focus instead on the anxieties within queer subcultures. The central tenet of queer horror focuses on supposed aberrations of eroticism, sexuality, and gender, and these in turn work to expose and highlight the hypocrisies and inconsistencies within seemingly normative power structures, and draw attention to the failure to maintain imaginary boundaries and borders that demarcate normalcy from deviancy. In particular, the werewolf figure allows for both a celebration of the shared otherness felt by marginalized sexualities via a hirsute empowerment, but also a complex negotiation of the shame felt in associations with such monstrousness.
Okay, I'll stop it there. So that's a direct rip-off of moments from Rebel Without a Cause. That was I was a teenage werewolf. That's quite clear to understand. An explanatory mode video essay is often one of the ones that we find more often on streaming platforms, in that they often contain this kind of obvious narration or voiceover that actually is then the script that we edit the videos to. Other forms of video essay tend to lean more into the idea of video art world, and they are often called the poetic register, or they fit a poetic register. And Christian Keithley says that actually these types of video essays resist this commitment to an explanatory mode, typical form, that they employ language very sparingly, and then when they do use language, it's normally in one particular way, and it seems unprivileged as well. So the video doesn't simply explain or explicate its theme, it tries to perform it as well. So it tries to do lots of performative work as well, in a good way rather than a bad way. They compose images and sounds very much like conceptual art that then possess this critical component that requires some deciphering from the person watching it. So it doesn't make it as obvious to watch. So this next clip, I'm going to show you from an video essay that was part of a collection for a journal that was looking at queer horror last October, like in Halloween time. And it was inviting people to kind of have a response to the ways in which we can queer horror in order to kind of make it even more queer than it already is. And this was Lucy Fife Donaldson, who works at University of St Andrews. And her take on this was looking at openings of horror films that often are about kind of show us roads and cars going down roads. And she was kind of thinking about the work of Sarah Ahmed and Sarah Ahmed's approach to orientations of queerness that actually aren't necessarily straight in their approach. And actually this straightness of the road and how it approaches the horror is what Lucy Fife Donaldson starts to kind of turn upside down, twisting, and various different ways of disorienting ourselves to borrow a little bit of queer theory as well. So I'll just show you a little bit of this. And you see she plays it backwards now, taking us back over the other way. The next time she does twist, I think. Oops, where is it? Here we go. So she takes a moment from various different horror films. That first one was, I think, from Get Out. And this is about these idea of twisting roads through the landscape as well, making things queer, perspectives that shift when multiple versions of them exist on screen. We can't really find out which way is up, which way is down, which way is left, which way is right. So it's about using landscape, I suppose, in that way to layer up this kind of wallpaper of different directions and disconnected roads as well, disturbing the order of things. And part of the way in which some of those video essays are brought about is literally just to play around with things. And sometimes that's part of the process when you have your films that you're working with, that they're layered in your editing suite and they exist in the kind of media bin is what we call it, where you can see all of the films existing at the same time. You can sometimes drag the view toolbar to make the films almost, you can see the entire film in one strip. You suddenly get aware of repeating patterns, repeating colors, and watching them side by side suddenly makes you kind of feel like you're playing with the images. And that idea of flow and play is really important when you kind of are creating things that are new. And it also allows us to kind of take pleasure in getting close to things in a world where we're actually dealing with things in a more removed digital sense. So I remember when I was a kind of a young, I say I'm young, 50 years old, but I was when I was basically doing my master's at Birkbeck, we got to go to the BFI at Stephen Street and look at films in celluloid form on old Steenbeck machines there. So I had the privilege of kind of being able to haptically kind of touch and feel film as I was watching it at the same time. Now, when we're removed from digital physical media like DVDs and VHS before that, we're reliant only on the screen itself. that digital formats actually remove us from this pleasure of hapticity. People like Laura Marks talk about actually video essay work as gaining a closeness to that film and reworking this idea of haptic, meaning to touch, to kind of rest on the surface of. So a lot of the work that video essay does tends to kind of work on this idea of play and flow and creative kind of experimentation, but also the haptic pleasures of getting back to touching things again, or feeling like we have some connection to the film that isn't just a kind of thematic or a kind of abstract thing. We can actually start to play around in physical ways as well. So there's an example of the ways in which we might actually start to use the editing suite as well. So the timeline allows us to kind of play around in a very plastic or pliable way in that digital filmmaking has kind of removed that pleasure from. So I'm just going to end on one particular example of a very quick experimental film that takes It's a Wonderful Life, a film that I presume most people have got some knowledge of. It's a Wonderful Life obviously has a moment in that film where actually quite a kind of a metatextual moment, a very self-aware moment where Frank Capra pauses the film and allows both the angel Clarence and supposedly God to comment on the character that we see the wonderful life of. And this moment has been taken by a video essayist and turned into something that is actually more experimental. So I'll let this play just for a little while underneath. Oops.
Violet,
Violet. Violet black.
violet,
Violet. Violet green.
violet,
Violet. Violet
brown, violet,
violet. Violet red.
violet,
Violet. Violet black.
violet,
Violet. Violet green.
So I'm just going to stop it there. It does go on for a while, but it's this still moment. So it's to kind of draw attention to the fact that it doesn't need to be a huge kind of mammoth undertaking when you're creating a video essay. You can take a micro moment, a tiny moment from a film, which is even just a still image here, and then talk about so many things that that film has an impact on. So this is not only kind of drawing attention to this kind of quite groundbreaking moment that often people overlook in this film. They often think about its kind of value at Christmas and kind of this warm kind of family-friendly feeling that it gives. I don't think it is that, by the way. I think it's very depressing. And there's no way that the character really is happy at the end of that film for me. Sorry to ruin everyone's Christmases. But this moment is often well known for... there are various different versions of the film that came out in the 1980s and 1990s where we had colorized versions of the film. And if anyone knows about colorized films where everyone's face looks orange and kind of very odd versions of the film, this film is kind of this clip is making us aware of those colors by drawing attention to the script. And every single time our central character there talks or says a color, and then they're all edited up together there to kind of draw attention to the way that this film has been distorted, dismembered almost. And they use all of these kind of haptic effects there, you can see, where they've distorted the film to make it look like a tearing VHS, or they've put layers on top of things to make things look like we're seeing things through gloopy kind of color filters. And some of the words that are set out, like violet, are actually characters in the film as well. So there's this double meaning of the color and a character at the same time as drawing attention to this film that is seemingly a classic Hollywood film, but at the same time maybe does some experimental work of its own as well. So I think that's one way of kind of showing you that actually sometimes, as Catherine Grant says here, video essay work is performative work. So it involves you actually changing the meaning of the film by changing the way that that film is, or that moment of moving image work is showcased. So you don't just simply represent it, you can actually change the way it performances precisely by the way in which you can offer a different undertaking or a different understanding of it. And Catherine Grant says this is at the heart of video essay work. It's about kind of doing performance work, but with somebody else's material in that sense.